Earl Whitman thought the road belonged to him. In a quiet mountain town, his word decided who worked, who suffered, and who stayed silent. So when a German shepherd barked, he chained the dog and raised his stick, just to remind everyone who was in charge. What he didn't know was that someone was watching. A man who had survived wars where fear meant death. A former Navy SEAL who had learned when to stay silent and when a line could never be crossed. Before we begin, please help me reach my first 1,000 subscribers. Your single click truly means more than you know. God bless you for keeping hope alive. The mountains of West Virginia stood calm beneath a pale afternoon sky, their green slopes unbroken as a narrow road wound through them, giving no sign that anything dangerous had ever taken root there. Daniel Brooks slowed his truck as he entered the town, more out of instinct than intention. It was the kind of place that barely announced itself. No welcome sign, no traffic light, no noise, just a single main road lined with aging storefronts and modest houses that looked as though they had learned to endure rather than thrive. Everything appeared peaceful at first glance. Too peaceful. Daniel was 35, tall and lean, his posture relaxed but deliberate, the way men moved when they had learned to conserve energy and attention. His dark hair was cropped short, threaded with faint gray at the temples, and a trimmed beard framed a face marked by strong angles and restraint. A thin, pale scar traced along his jawline, permanent but unremarkable, the kind left by something sharp and fast. His gray eyes were steady and observant, trained by years as a Navy SEAL to read spaces before people, silence before sound. Beside him sat Rex, a German shepherd nearing 8 years old, large and solid, with a thick black and tan coat and a muzzle beginning to gray. One ear bore a small notch from an old injury, and his movements carried the faint stiffness of a dog who had known pain and learned to live through it. Rex's amber eyes followed the world carefully, always checking back to Daniel, not for commands, but for alignment. They had learned trust in places where it had not been optional. As Daniel parked and stepped into town, Rex stayed close at his side. The reaction was immediate and subtle. A man sweeping a storefront paused and lowered his broom. A woman exiting a cafe crossed the street to avoid passing too near. Conversations dipped, then stopped. No one stared outright, and no one smiled. It wasn't hostility Daniel sensed, but caution, the kind that settled into a place over time, taught slowly, reinforced quietly. He had seen it before, in places where curiosity carried consequences. The grocery store sat at the edge of the road, its sign faded, windows clean but old. Inside, a bell chimed once and echoed longer than it should have. Behind the counter stood Mary Collins, a woman in her early 60s, short and sturdy, with silver hair pulled neatly back and eyes sharp with long-earned awareness. She did not smile at Daniel right away. She observed him carefully, taking in his stillness, the absence of nervous motion, and the way Rex sat quietly near the door. Dogs reflected their owners, she believed, and this one reflected discipline and patience. "You passing through?" Mary asked, her voice calm and neutral. "For now," Daniel replied, matching her tone as he placed his items on the counter. As she rang him up, Mary noticed her nephew Ethan pretending to organize shelves nearby, a tall, thin 17-year-old with restless hands and watchful eyes. He studied Daniel with curiosity, edged by fear, not of the man himself, but of what his presence might disturb. Mary recognized the look. She had worn it once, too. Outside again, the afternoon light softened the town's edges, but the tension remained. Daniel rested a brief hand on Rex's head before starting the engine, grounding himself. From the doorway, Mary watched the truck pull away, feeling the familiar conflict rise in her chest. Hope, dangerous and fragile, paired with fear born of experience. The town had learned to stay quiet, learned that silence kept it alive, and it did not yet know what to do with someone who noticed. The sound came first, long before the trucks appeared, engines low, heavy, confident, rolling through the mountain pass and into town, breaking the fragile quiet like a hand pressing down on a held breath. Daniel Brooks stood across the street from the gas station when he heard them, Rex sitting at his side. The rhythm was wrong for locals, too synchronized, too deliberate. When the convoy emerged, 3 oversized pickup trucks, black and spotless despite the dust, Daniel understood immediately. This was not traffic. This was arrival. Earl Whitman stepped out of the lead truck as if the road itself belonged to him. He was a large man in his late 50s, broad through the chest and shoulders, his weight carried with the assurance of someone who had never been told no in a way that mattered. His iron-gray hair was cut short, his face thick with old sun and permanent confidence. A trimmed mustache sat above thin lips that curved easily into a smile that never reached his pale, restless eyes that scanned the street not for people, but for reactions. He wore a clean button-down shirt with sleeves rolled to mid-forearm and a gold watch catching the light. He did not wear a badge, and he did not need one. In this town, authority came not from uniforms, but from ownership, of land, of jobs, of fear. The townspeople reacted before Whitman spoke. A shopkeeper ducked back inside. A man leaning against a mailbox straightened and stepped away. The street cleared itself instinctively, leaving Whitman and his men at the center. One man laughed loudly at nothing. Another cracked open a soda and spat onto the pavement. It was a performance, Daniel realized, practiced through repetition. They wanted to be seen. They wanted the silence to confirm their power. The German Shepherd was tied near the gas pumps, its chain wrapped tight around a metal post. The dog was younger than Rex, perhaps 4 or 5, lean and dust-dulled, ears upright but tense, tail low, body rigid with confusion more than aggression. It barked once when Whitman approached, a sharp, instinctive sound, more warning than challenge. Whitman stopped, turned slowly, and smiled. "Hear that?" he said loudly, glancing around as if inviting agreement. "Dogs got opinions." Without waiting, he yanked the chain hard, sending the dog stumbling, claws scraping concrete. He picked up a thick rubber hose from the truck bed and brought it down against the dog's side, the sound dull and heavy. The dog cried out and tried to shrink away, twisting uselessly against the chain. Daniel did not step forward, not yet. He stood still, face unchanged, attention narrowing the way training had taught him. He measured distance, the number of men, the weight of the hose, the relaxed certainty in Whitman's stance. More than that, he watched the people, the woman covering her mouth, the man staring at the ground, the fear moving through the crowd like a silent current. Rex felt it too, muscles tense beneath his coat, but he did not growl. He waited, trusting Daniel's stillness. Behind the dusty grocery store window, Ethan Collins watched, 17 and all sharp limbs, blonde hair perpetually untidy, freckles stark against skin gone pale with fear. His hands shook as he raised his phone just enough to frame the scene. He did not mean to be brave, only to remember. His uncle's image flashed in his mind, blood on the road, a story that never quite made sense, adults warning him not to ask questions. He pressed record. He did not send it. Not yet. When Whitman struck again and laughed, his gaze flicked toward Daniel, curiosity replacing indifference. Daniel met the look without challenge, jaw tightening once before stilling, his hand resting briefly on Rex's neck. This was not the moment. Acting too soon would change nothing. The beating stopped as abruptly as it had begun. Whitman tossed the hose back into the truck, wiped his hands as if finishing a chore, and climbed into the driver's seat. The convoy pulled away, leaving silence heavier than before. The dog lay trembling against the post, sides heaving. Only then did the town exhale, someone rushing forward. someone whispering what sounded like a prayer. Daniel remained where he was, gaze fixed on the road Whitman had taken. This was the shape of the silence now revealed. Not peace, but control. Not calm, but conditioning. Behind the glass, Ethan lowered his phone and hid it away, fear cold and familiar. Across the street, Daniel finally turned, expression unreadable. The town had revealed its owner, and owners, he knew, always believed they would never be challenged. Whitman noticed Rex the way men like him noticed everything that could be tested, not with curiosity, but with appetite. The German shepherd sat beside Daniel near the edge of the station lot, calm, watchful, unmoving despite the tension still clinging to the air. Rex's size marked him immediately. Broad chest, powerful shoulders, thick black and tan coat dulled only slightly by travel. His muzzle carried a hint of gray, and his eyes, amber and steady, followed Whitman without challenge. To Whitman, that calm was not discipline, it was defiance. "Nice dog," Whitman said, his voice casual as he motioned to one of his men. The man, early 40s, thick-necked, beard grown more from neglect than style, moved quickly, producing a length of chain from the truck bed. Before anyone could react, Rex was yanked forward and looped against a steel post near the pumps. The chain scraped loudly, the sound sharp enough to make several people flinch. Rex did not bark. He braced his paws against the concrete, muscles tightening, eyes fixed not on Whitman, but on Daniel. Daniel stepped closer, just enough to shorten the distance. "Let him go," he said. His voice was low even, carrying no threat. It was not a plea. It was a statement. Whitman smiled. Up close, the lines on his face deepened, carved by years of confidence and indulgence. "See?" he said to the crowd, spreading his hands. "Dog already knows who's boss." He took the wooden baton from the truck, smooth, polished from use, and weighed it in his palm. The crowd remained silent, a ring of bowed heads and rigid shoulders. Whitman brought the baton down against Rex's side, not with rage, but with demonstration. Rex's body jerked, a sharp breath tearing from his chest, but he did not snap. He did not break eye contact with Daniel. Daniel spoke once more, quieter this time. "That's enough," Whitman laughed, short and dismissive, raising the baton again. "You tourists always think—" The sentence never finished. As the baton came down, Daniel moved, not fast, precise, one step in, angled just enough to change the line of force. His left hand caught Whitman's wrist mid-swing, fingers closing with surgical certainty. His right shoulder rotated, stealing balance rather than striking it. The baton glanced off metal instead of flesh, clattering to the ground. Whitman staggered back a half step, surprise flashing across his face before anger could form. There was no punch, no shout, just control. Daniel held Whitman's wrist in a pressure lock learned long ago, a technique designed to stop motion without spectacle. Whitman's breath hitched. His free hand flailed once, then stilled as pain registered where dominance had lived. Around them, the town froze. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered a name. Rex remained chained, chest heaving, ears pinned back, but his eyes never left Daniel. When Daniel spoke again, it was only to the dog. "Down!" Rex lowered himself carefully, obedience overriding pain. Trust unbroken. For a heartbeat, Whitman and Daniel stood close enough to feel each other's breath. Whitman smelled of expensive soap and old authority. Daniel smelled of road dust and restraint. Whitman wrenched his arm free with a snarl and shoved Daniel hard in the chest. "You think you're tough?" he barked, loud enough for the pumps to hear. "You think you can tell me what to do in my town?" His men shifted, hands hovering near belts, eyes darting between their boss and the stranger who had not flinched. Behind the grocery store window, Ethan felt his legs go weak. He had the phone in his hand again, recording without realizing when he had lifted it. His heart pounded so hard it hurt. This was the moment his uncle had talked about, the one that never ended well. Ethan's mind screamed at him to stop, to hide, to survive. He kept recording anyway. Whitman stooped, grabbed the baton from the ground, and lifted it once more. This time not toward Rex, but toward Daniel. "Last chance," he said, teeth bared in something close to a grin. Daniel did not raise his hands. He did not step back. He met Whitman's gaze, steady and unblinking. The way he had met men in darker places who believed power made them untouchable. "Walk away," Daniel said. The words were simple, final. Whitman hesitated, just long enough for the crowd to feel it. Then his face hardened. "Chain him," he snapped, not to his men, but to the moment itself. The order hung in the air, ugly and incomplete. No one moved, not even his own men. The silence stretched, fragile and electric. Whitman's eyes flicked to Rex, then back to Daniel. Something old and dangerous twisted behind them. Fear, perhaps, or the first crack in certainty. At last, Whitman lowered the baton. Not because he had lost, but because witnesses had multiplied. He spat once onto the concrete. "This isn't over," he said, stepping back toward his truck. "You and that dog don't belong here." He turned away, voice already rising as he barked orders to his men, the performance reassembling itself as protection. Only when the engines roared back to life did the town breathe again. Someone rushed to Rex, fumbling with the chain. Daniel knelt beside the dog, hands gentle, checking ribs, whispering nothing at all. Rex pressed his forehead briefly against Daniel's shoulder, a quiet exchange that needed no audience. Across the lot, Ethan lowered his phone, tears blurring the screen. He had captured it, all of it. And for the first time in his life, he did not look away. The line had been crossed, not by violence, but by refusal. And the town knew it. Whitman did not answer humiliation with fists. He answered it with the machinery he owned. The police cruisers arrived in pairs, lights muted, sirens unnecessary, rolling into the station lot with practiced inevitability. The officers who stepped out wore the same town-issued uniforms as always, but their posture told a different story. Shoulders slightly hunched, eyes careful, movements deferential. Leading them was Chief Harold Vance, a man in his late 40s with a narrow face and a permanent crease between his brows, as if worry had been carved there by repetition. His hair was thinning at the crown, his jaw shadowed by stubble. He no longer bothered to shave clean. Vance had once been an earnest cop, the kind who believed procedure protected people. Years in Whitman's orbit had taught him a quieter lesson. Procedure protected power. Vance spoke first, voice measured, apologetic without saying sorry. "Sir, we've had reports of a disturbance." He did not look at Whitman when he said it. He looked at Daniel. The charge came quickly and vaguely. Disorderly conduct interfering with a lawful activity. Words that could stretch to fit whatever Whitman needed them to mean. Daniel listened, hands relaxed at his sides, expression unreadable. He did not argue. He did not explain. He had learned long ago that explanations fed systems like this. Rex stood close, ears back, body angled protectively toward Daniel, his breathing shallow but steady. The separation happened fast. An officer, young, freckled, eyes darting, looped a leash over Rex's neck with a gentleness that felt like apology. "Just for now," he murmured, not meeting Daniel's gaze. Rex resisted once. Paws bracing against the concrete, a low sound vibrating in his chest. Daniel placed a hand on the dog's head, thumb pressing lightly between the ears. "Easy," he said. Rex stilled. Trust won over instinct. The leash tightened, and Rex was led away toward the animal control van, idling near the curb, the words "pending evaluation" already stamped on his future. Whitman watched, arms crossed, satisfaction settling into his features like a well-worn coat. Daniel allowed the cuffs to be placed on his wrists. The metal clicked closed, snug but not painful, a sound he hadn't heard in years, yet recognized instantly. It did not stir panic. It stirred memory, of restraint mistaken for victory, of men who believed control ended the story. He met Whitman's eyes once as he was turned toward the cruiser. Whitman smiled thinly. Convinced the balance had been restored. Power, he believed, always corrected itself. From behind the grocery store window, Ethan felt the world tilt. He watched Rex disappear into the van, watched Daniel guided toward the back seat of the cruiser, and felt something hot and sharp rise behind his eyes. Fear followed close behind, familiar and suffocating. He slipped out the back door and into the alley, hands shaking as he pulled his phone free. The video was there, clear, indisputable. He knew what happened to people who shared things like this. He also knew what happened to people who stayed silent. His thumb hovered, then moved, not to post, but to send. Lena Brooks received the file as the sun dipped behind the ridge. She was 32, tall and spare, with dark hair pulled into a tight knot that matched the focus in her eyes. Her skin was olive-toned, her face sharp with angles that suggested both her brother's restraint and her own relentless curiosity. She worked from a small apartment 2 states away, walls lined with corkboards and notes, the residue of stories half told and truths hard won. Lena had learned journalism the hard way, by being ignored, threatened, and occasionally proven right too late. She watched the video once without blinking, then again, slower. The pattern revealed itself immediately. Unofficial power, local compliance, fear enforced through spectacle. Her jaw tightened. "You shouldn't have to carry this alone," she said softly to the empty room, already opening a new folder, already mapping connections. At the station, Daniel was led into a holding room that smelled of disinfectant and old coffee. The bench was bolted to the floor. The light too bright? Chief Vance stood in the doorway for a moment, hands on his belt, eyes conflicted. "This will go easier if you cooperate," he offered, not unkindly. Daniel met his gaze. "I am cooperating," he replied. Vance hesitated, then nodded, retreating as if relieved to leave. Alone, Daniel closed his eyes briefly and breathed. Somewhere in the building, a dog barked once, short, questioning. Rex. The sound steadied him. He had not lost control. He had entered a phase where control pretended to belong to someone else. Whitman didn't stay to watch the paperwork. He didn't need to. He left town as he had arrived, confident that the system would do what it always did. The town, meanwhile, returned to its posture of careful normalcy. Doors closed, voices lowered. The dog's chain clinked faintly as animal control pulled away. Only Ethan stood in the alley a moment longer, phone warm in his palm, heart racing. The story had crossed a boundary now, leaving the mountains, finding eyes that knew how to look. Power had struck back. It believed the matter settled. It was wrong. Silence wrapped the holding cell like a second set of walls. Daniel Brooks sat on the narrow bench with his hands resting loosely on his knees, cuffs gone, but the pressure of restraint still present in the air. The room smelled of disinfectant and stale paper, the hum of fluorescent lights flattening time. Daniel did not speak when the door opened and closed, did not ask questions when forms were slid through the slot. He had learned, in places far from here, that silence unsettled men who expected resistance. It denied them the performance they needed to feel in control. He slowed his breathing until the rhythm matched the room, letting the noise of the station fade to something distant and manageable. In the kennel behind the building, Rex occupied a narrow concrete run with chain-link walls and a shallow metal bowl bolted to the floor. He was sore, ribs tender, muscles tight, but his posture remained composed, weight balanced carefully over paws that knew how to wait. His black and tan coat bore smudges of dust and a faint smear of dried blood near the flank, but his amber eyes were clear. When footsteps passed, his ears tracked the sound. When a door slammed, he did not startle. He paced twice, then settled, pressing his body against the cool wall. Somewhere beyond the steel and concrete, Daniel was here. Rex let out a single low huff, not a bark, not a plea. Presence. It was a language they shared. 2 states away, Lena Brooks worked under a desk lamp that cast a tight circle of light across corkboard and paper. She stood as she read, tall and spare, shoulders squared, dark hair pulled back so severely it revealed the sharp planes of her face. Her skin carried a faint olive tone, her eyes dark and focused, moving quickly from screen to notes to map. She did not chase outrage. She chased patterns. The video Ethan had sent was one piece, clear, brutal, undeniable. But Lena knew better than to treat it as an ending. She cross-referenced public records, scanned local court filings, and pulled property transfers that clustered around Whitman's companies like iron filings around a magnet. Accidents with missing reports, foreclosures accelerated by zoning changes. Donations routed through shell nonprofits that returned as consulting fees. This was not a single act of cruelty. It was a system designed to look ordinary from a distance and inevitable up close. Back in town, Mary Collins waited until night settled before she closed the market and locked the door. The quiet after hours felt different, less performative, more honest. Mary moved to the back office where an old safe sat beneath a shelf of ledgers. She was smaller than she used to be, shoulders slightly rounded, but her hands were steady as she knelt and turned the dial. Her husband, Thomas Collins, had taught her the numbers years ago, pressing her fingers gently to the steel as if committing more than a combination to memory. Thomas had been a careful man, tall and soft-spoken, with a habit of writing things down when they didn't sit right. He had died on a rain-slicked curve the night he planned to ask questions. The town called it an accident. Mary had learned to keep quiet. The safe opened with a tired sigh. Inside were envelopes yellowed with age, a notebook bound in cracked leather, and folded copies of permits and correspondence. Mary's breath caught as she read Thomas's neat handwriting, dates, names, small observations that accumulated into something unmistakable. A pattern. The same names recurring at different edges of different troubles. Whitman's companies, the same officials approving the same exceptions. Mary closed her eyes once, a brief private grief passing through her. She had not opened this safe because opening it meant admitting that silence had cost her something she could not get back. She gathered the papers anyway. Silence, she understood now, had been a weapon pointed inward. Daniel spent the night in the holding cell without incident. When an officer checked on him, Daniel met the look calmly, offering nothing that could be used against him. He replayed the day not as regret, but as inventory, what had been revealed, what remained hidden, and what pressure would do next. Control sought to reassert itself through boredom and delay. He would not rush it. In the kennel, Rex slept in short cycles, waking to track sounds, then settling again. When dawn's first light crept through the high windows, he lifted his head and listened. The station was quieter than before, as if holding its own breath. By morning, Lena had lines drawn across her board, connections tightened, questions sharpened. She drafted emails to editors she trusted, the kind who knew how to protect sources and verify without warning the very systems under scrutiny. She flagged records for subpoenas and outlined a timeline that placed Whitman's influence not at the center, but everywhere adjacent. The story, she realized, would not hinge on a single video. It would hinge on corroboration, voices layered, until silence could no longer pass for consent. Mary waited until the store opened to make her call. Her voice trembled only once as she spoke, then steadied. She did not give everything. Not yet. She offered enough to be taken seriously and kept the rest close, like a shield she had learned too late to lift. Across town, Daniel was released from the cell into the corridor to wait, the day's procedural wheels beginning to turn. He caught a faint echo from the kennels, a familiar sound, restrained and present. Rex. Daniel closed his eyes briefly and exhaled. Silence could be endured. It could also be aimed. And now, finally, it was being aimed back. The storm broke over the Appalachians just after midnight, rain slashing sideways across the ridgelines, thunder rolling so close it rattled windows and set car alarms crying out into the dark. The town disappeared beneath sheets of water, the narrow road turning slick and reflective, lights blurring into trembling halos. Daniel Brooks felt the first heavy thunderclap through the concrete walls of the station, a low vibration that settled into his chest. He stood at the holding room doorway, free now but not released, watching rain race down the glass as if the mountains themselves had decided to speak. Somewhere beyond the corridor, Rex barked once, steady, unmistakable. Daniel closed his eyes for a breath. Storms change things. They always had. They arrived in the rain, not quietly, and not all at once. State police cruisers cut through the downpour with lights flaring blue and white, followed by two unmarked sedans that parked with practiced precision. Captain Laura McKenna stepped out first, tall and straight-backed despite the weather, her dark hair pulled into a tight ponytail that exposed a sharp jaw and eyes the color of wet steel. She wore her uniform like a promise, creased, deliberate, unadorned. McKenna had built a reputation for moving slowly and leaving nothing unexamined, a habit forged after a partner was buried by bad paperwork and worse politics. Behind her came Special Agent Daniel Ruiz, mid-40s, lean with a close-cropped beard and a faint scar crossing his left eyebrow. Ruiz carried himself with quiet economy, coat collar turned up against the rain, eyes already cataloging doors, faces, exits. A third arrival followed close. Sarah Klein, an independent investigative reporter in her early 30s, tall and slender, with wind-tangled auburn hair and pale skin gone pink from the cold. She held a waterproof notebook to her chest like armor, her gaze sharp with the impatience of someone who had chased stories that preferred the dark. Inside the station, Chief Harold Vance stiffened as the group entered. His shoulders slumped a fraction when McKenna introduced herself, badge catching the fluorescent light. Ruiz's questions came next, precise, neutral, devastating. They asked for logs, for reports, for custody records. They asked where the dog had been taken. They asked why complaints ended in no further action. Vance's answers thinned, then frayed. Down the hall, Daniel watched as procedure began to do what it was supposed to do. Not quickly, not kindly, thoroughly. When Ruiz asked to see the video, Ethan's file appeared on a tablet held steady by Sarah Klein, rainwater still beating along its edge. The footage played without commentary. The room changed. At the same time, Mary Collins stood in the back of her market with the old notebook open on the counter, the rain drumming on the roof above her like a second heartbeat. She spoke into the phone with a steadiness that surprised her, laying out dates and names, forwarding scans she had made hours earlier. Across state lines, Lena Brooks coordinated quietly, lining up affidavits, flagging records for emergency holds, and looping Sarah into a shared folder that grew heavier by the minute. The story had stopped being singular. It had become cumulative. When people began to speak, first in whispers, then with names, the storm outside seemed almost polite by comparison. Whitman arrived late, confident as ever, coat immaculate beneath a wide umbrella, boots clean despite the mud. The smile reached his mouth and stopped. McKenna met him without ceremony. Ruiz read the charges in a voice as calm as rainfall: abuse of authority, animal cruelty, economic coercion, obstruction. Whitman protested with practiced outrage, then with threats that rang hollow against the weight of corroboration stacking up around him. When they asked for his phone, his eyes flicked once toward the door. Sarah Klein noted the flick, wrote it down, and did not look up. The handcuffs closed with a sound too small for the moment. Whitman's power collapsed not with spectacle, but with documentation. Daniel stood back as Rex was brought in from the kennel. Wet fur clinging to his ribs, eyes bright and searching. The handler, a young woman with tired eyes and a gentle grip, unclipped the lead. Rex crossed the room in 3 steady steps and pressed his forehead to Daniel's thigh, a quiet confirmation. Daniel knelt, hands careful along the dog's flank, checking tenderness, feeling the familiar solidity beneath. "You're good," he murmured, "not for the room, not for the record." Ruiz watched the exchange with a flicker of something like respect. McKenna nodded once. The storm outside eased, thunder rolling farther off, rain softening as if the mountains had said enough. By dawn, the town looked different, not fixed. Awake. Doors opened that had stayed shut for years. People stood under awnings and spoke in normal voices. Sarah Klein filed from the passenger seat of a cruiser, words precise. Quotes verified, context intact. Lena sent one last message. "It's moving. Stay put." Daniel watched the light creep back across the road, Rex leaning against his leg, weight warm and real. Power had struck back and broken on the thing it underestimated most: time, patience, and the refusal to look away. The storm had arrived, and with it, the truth. Morning arrived clean and unhurried, sunlight spilling over the ridgelines and down the narrow main road as if the night had scrubbed everything to its bones. The air smelled of wet earth and pine, a gentler scent than the fear that used to linger here. Doors stood open. A radio played somewhere without being turned down. People spoke in normal voices, tentative at first, then fuller, testing the sound of it, learning again what it felt like to be heard without consequence. Daniel Brooks worked on his truck at the edge of the street, sleeves rolled, hands steady. The engine hood was propped open, tools laid out with quiet order. He moved with the ease of a man finishing something rather than beginning it. His face, still marked by restraint, looked lighter now, as if a weight had shifted from the inside to somewhere manageable. He planned to leave. He always did. Places like this rarely asked him to stay, and when they did, he rarely answered. Rex lay on the porch of the grocery store, head on his paws, sunlight warming the black and tan fur along his back. The stiffness in his ribs had eased, his breathing was deep and even. He watched the street with relaxed attention, tail thumping once when a child passed too close and laughed instead of flinching. Trust, once broken, was hard to mend. Trust, once kept, returned quickly. Rex closed his eyes, content to be where he was. Mary Collins stood in the doorway, a fresh cardigan pulled around her shoulders, posture straighter than Daniel remembered. The lines in her face were the same, but her eyes were clearer, unburdened. She stepped down the porch and offered Daniel a mug of coffee without asking if he wanted it. "You don't have to go today," she said, not pleading, not commanding, just stating a possibility. She spoke of a community patrol, of lights that needed watching and people who needed reassurance, of nights that would be quieter if someone like him listened without looming. Daniel considered it, the way he considered most things, by weighing the cost of staying against the cost of leaving. "I won't promise," he said. Mary nodded. "That's enough," she replied. Across town, Lena Brooks published her investigation. The article did not shout. It laid facts end to end until the shape of the truth could not be denied. Screens lit up, calls came in. By noon, the town's name was being spoken elsewhere, not as a rumor, but as a reckoning. Lena closed her laptop and let herself breathe for the first time in days. She sent one message, "You did right," and left it at that. Ethan Collins received his news in the afternoon, a phone call that left him staring at the wall in disbelief. A journalism scholarship, a chance to learn how to do this work without being alone. He walked to the store with a grin he could not suppress, awkward and earnest, and crouched to greet Rex with the back of his hand. Rex sniffed, approved, and leaned into the attention. Ethan laughed, a sound that belonged to someone already standing taller. By evening, the town had settled into something like ease. Daniel closed the hood of his truck and wiped his hands on a rag. He looked down the road once, then back at the porch where Rex slept in the fading light. The decision did not arrive with fanfare. It rarely did. He would stay a while, fix what could be fixed. Watch without making people feel watched. When he finally drove away, it would be because the town no longer needed him to remind it how to stand. As dusk deepened, Daniel sat on the steps beside Rex, the warmth of the day lingering in the wood beneath them. He understood something he had circled for years without naming. Victory was not the sound of cuffs closing or headlines landing. Victory was the quiet return of ordinary courage, the moment people remembered they did not need to bow to survive. The town breathed, and for the first time in a long while, so did he. Sometimes miracles don't come loudly. Sometimes God works through quiet courage, steady hands, and people who refuse to look away. In our daily lives, we may not face great darkness, but we all face moments where choosing kindness, truth, and compassion matters. And in those moments, God's miracles begin. If this story touched your heart, please share it, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. May God bless you and protect you, and may you be someone else's miracle today.